where we've got to after a year of a Labour government on growth, but also who's benefiting from it and where is benefiting from it. And of course, in kind of usual government business, the government is doing a lot on this agenda too, whether it's handing more powers to Tracy and colleagues to help deliver growth in every corner of our country, the industrial strategy, skills plans, you know, the list is long. But what we're here today really is to say, you know, what does this all add up to? What does a regionally led model of growth look like? What is grassroots growth? And how can we move away from this idea that growth is a zero-sum game where someone has to lose for another part of the country to win? To tackle this question, we've got a stellar panel. I'm delighted to be joined by Tracy Brabin, Mayor of West Yorkshire, Miatta Fahnbulleh MP, who is now Minister for Devolution, Faith and Communities, and we're delighted that she's also leading on the devolution bill on behalf of the government, Richard Partington, Senior Economics Correspondent for The Guardian, and Marcus Johns, our own Senior Research Fellow at IPPR North. In terms of the format for this afternoon's conversation, I'm going to hand over to each of the speakers to speak for 5 minutes on, well, maybe reflecting on what they've just heard from the Prime Minister and the vision for growth, grassroots growth, that we heard today, before I take the chair's prerogative to ask a few questions of our panel before throwing it open to you. So, Tracy, I have you down as going first, so if you're happy to kick off. What did you make of what the PM's just set out?
Well, I don't know what you all think, but I thought it was absolutely phenomenal, and it's absolutely what we needed to hear. The politics of grievance are not going to grow our economy. The politics of grievance are only there to get people shouting at each other, to hold us back, and to say that the past was better than the future and that the past is better than today. So I was really delighted. I felt the way it was opened with Margaret and Hillsborough set the tone, that working class people will now be heard, and the approach around 50% of young people going to university. I think when you're talking about growing the economy, widening that out, 75% of young people having apprenticeships, going to technical college and university, is what I'm hearing from the unicorns that have come to invest in Leeds, whether that's PEXA or Go Cardless. They are saying, we don't necessarily need kids with degrees. We need those vibrant, curious kids who've gone to FE college and are gamers and are really going to be solving our problems for the future. I also was really pleased to hear his approach about community, and we got a couple of name checks in Calderdale. I was really pleased about that. And to reduce it to I thought it was pretty exquisite, the gentle knock on the door to check on a neighbour. You can't grow the economy if you don't have a strong community. So for me, as mayor, my mission in life is to grow the economy. I have to say, just as a sidebar, I am incredibly worried about May, because if we do see a reform landslide, they will be getting out of bed every day, and their prime mission will be to hold us back and to destroy what we're doing. And we are on fire in West Yorkshire. Devolution has given us £4 billion worth of investment, 4 billion into a region that wouldn't have had it without devolution. We are focused on transport. That's how you grow the economy. You thicken the labour market by making sure people can get to good jobs and skills. We are bringing buses back into public control. We're bringing trams back to West Yorkshire, connecting Leeds and Bradford with spades in the ground by 2028. We're bringing that all together with rail and our electric bikes under the Weaver network, integrated ticketing, like that London-style transport. Businesses are crying out for it. Every time I meet a business, that's what they talk about, is transport. Skills is their second priority. That's why having devolution and devolved powers over adult education, really, really important. But we are also pressing for further wider devolution for post-16 skills, for example. And I'm pleased that skills have gone into DWP, because we've got 47 million in total to get people who are economically inactive due to ill health or about to fall out of the labour market, to get them well and get them into work, and to stop them falling out of the labour market. I can't do that if skills aren't involved. So that's what we've been really making the case for, an escalator of learning for young people, whatever age, whether you've been made redundant at 45, whether you're in your 60s and want to retrain because you know you're going to want to work till you're 70 plus. There is the opportunity, as in West Yorkshire we are a region of learning and creativity. And finally, for me, what's been very important, and it's personal to me growing up in social housing, is affordable and accessible homes. Really, really important. You can't grow the economy if your workforce are every 6 months packing everything into a black bin bag, or they're in temporary housing, or they're having to move in with their mum and dad, taking their 3 kids with them, and they're overcrowded. So it's a real opportunity that mayors can take to sort of fix the foundations. But on top of that is the soft powers of convening, and also that international ambassadorial role. So being able to go to India, to go to America, to build relationships with the mayors in other countries where they are crying out for stability in relationships. And even in a meeting yesterday, somebody raised the fact that whilst it's great we've got a Labour government and we've got stability with Rachel, the churn of ministers is also frustrating and holds us back, because you've just told somebody about your great AI cluster and you have to start again with a new minister. So I think mayors are a bit of a secret weapon in that way, because we're consistent, we're here, we know our communities, and we're also ready to invest and take risks ourselves. So we can speak more about the Northern Square Mile, all the advanced manufacturing, professional services, all the things we excel at. But I'm really interested to know what you think good growth looks like.
Brilliant, thank you very much. May I just ask one question before I come to you, Nyata? I suppose one thing that we're hearing a lot is, obviously, the Prime Minister in the same breath talks about growth and he talks about living standards. And often, on the doorsteps and learning from progressives around the world, cost of living is still very much, how people are experiencing the economy. So, in your mind, how do we address both the cost of living and grow the economy at once, or are they two sides of the same coin?
Yeah, I would say they're two sides of the same coin, because one example is the Mayor's Fare. We were the first to bring in the £2 capped bus fare. In West Yorkshire, it's different companies, different fare structures. If you got on a first bus and it broke down, you had to get on a Arriva, you'd have to pay again. It's very confusing, so we brought in the Mayor's Fare. Any bus, anywhere, any distance in West Yorkshire. The day saver was £5.50, any number of journeys. And I think that's gendered as well, because often women do many journeys because they're taking kids to school or caring or 2 jobs. You may disagree with me, I don't have the equivocal data, but it feels that's about right. So the Mayor's Fare really landed on the doorstep when we were campaigning, because that brought down the budgets of families. But also, we can intervene as mayors to enable people who are on low wages to get the skills for higher paid work. So, for example, the telecoms sector told me they could not recruit telecoms engineers. They have too many vacancies. So we put on a course for telecoms engineers, 800 students, but we could choose who went on that course. So people with a criminal record, because telecoms takes people with a particular level of criminal record, people who've been generationally unemployed. And nearly 90% of those 800 got a job, but they were all men. So I'm like, where were the women? So we put on a bespoke, women-only telecoms course that had a shorter day and a longer modular period for the training. And talking to those women, the majority were single parents, working in kitchens or in care, low-skilled work. So we have to put more money in people's pockets, of course we do, but we also have to empower them with the skills to be able to get those better paid jobs. And it was really pleasing. Only a month or so ago, I met a woman who had come from abroad. She couldn't get a job. She was a scientist, couldn't get a job. She was working in McDonald's, and she went on the telecoms course, and now she's a telecoms engineer. And she was talking to a woman who'd done the telecoms course, was now a manager of the telecoms course for women. So you just think that's a sweet spot, isn't it, for mayors to be able to choose where we make those interventions to make sure people can not only have more money in their pocket, but can access those great well-paid jobs.
Brilliant, thank you, Tracy. I mean, it really demonstrates this grassroots growth, you know, mayor's fair, mayoral stability, and being able to do that skills matching, really incredible. How does it look like from your perspective, Miat? Obviously, you're an MP rooted in community, but you're also a minister, kind of looking at this from the macro level. So, what's your approach to growth or grassroots growth?
Look, I love the phrase grassroots growth. I heard it for the first time today, but now that's I'm running with it. Look, so, 3 reflections. I think the first thing I'd say is, I think the Prime Minister sets out the challenge that we feel that we have to confront really, really clearly. That sense of decline that people are feeling in our communities, that's been born out of a decade and a half of living standards flatlining, the cost of essentials rising, people seeing their communities held back because there hasn't been the investment, and that genuine sense of frustration and that impatience for change. And he also, I think, set out really clearly the urgency and the necessity for us to respond to that change. Now, my view is, of course, there are national levers that we need to yank and things that we need to do, but we will not unlock the change that we need to see in places unless we push power down. Because in truth, the challenges that Tracy is facing in her patch will be different to the challenges that Sadiq is facing, will be different to the challenges that other mayors are facing. So responding to particular challenges in order to unlock growth in a way that works for the community can only happen if we push power down. And, you know, I'm new to the job. I'm incredibly excited by the work that's been done. We're taking through the devolution bill at the moment. And the thing that makes me excited about it is that we're very clear that this is the floor. This is not the summit. But what it does is that it locks down a framework. And I've been in the world of trying to negotiate devolution deals for a very long time. And it is slow, it is painful, it's ad hoc, it's a process of attrition. And actually what the bill does is say, this is the norm now. And here is a standard set of powers that just makes sense that it sits at the city region level and it looks like this. And then critically, and this is the thing that I think will be the game changer, we're putting in a right to request, which basically says to mayors, what is it that you want and need in order to respond to the challenges you face? And Whitehall has to respond. You can't no longer say, look, we don't want to engage because it's a bit too hard or doesn't really work with what we want to do as a department. And I think the ability, and already we're seeing it, you know, our mayors are very, very effective. They're stacking up their case, they have their demands, but you can already see it coming into play. And I think that's a massive opportunity. But for me, this agenda, devolution, I think is right because it rewires the state, and I think we absolutely need to yank power from the centre and push it out. But I also think there is a fundamental project about rewiring the economy within it. And that is not just about growth in particular places that responds to the needs of particular parts of the community, but it's also the ability to put community front and centre. And so alongside power going into our mayors and our regions, there's a really important part which is about power going into our communities, so that people have voice agency in order to respond to the really everyday grassroots things that they're seeing in their communities. We just launched our Pride in Place. And the principle behind that is to say, bring people around to have a conversation about their place and what they want to see in their place, and the changes they want. And then critically, you give them some power, you give them the resources in order to respond to that. And that bridges and binds community, but it creates its own power and momentum, and creates a sense of hope, and a sense that people can drive change. And for me, you know, the job of this government, as I see it, is in the course of the next 5 years, like renewal will take a decade. We need 2 terms, we're really clear about that. But in the course of the next 5 years, you can create the ability by pushing power down for people to respond in a way that gives them a sense that change is happening, and then we build the structure on top of that. And then critically for me, and I say this as a cooperative MP that's very proud, there is the opportunity, I think, for our mayors, our local authorities and our communities to think about an economic response that gives people stake, power, ownership. So the community rights buy that we talked about, I think is an absolute game changer because there's a chance for communities to take control. Cooperative ways, and we've seen that with some of our mayors with amazing ways in which they are thinking about not just designing services, cooperative retrofit organisations, but how you give people power and agency in that. And if we can do that in place after place, that is how we deliver grassroots growth. So I think there's a really, really powerful agenda. And the final thing I'd say before being quiet is there is now urgency. And I think, look, the PM had his Weetabix this morning, and he talked about the fight of our life. And there is a very dark, divisive politics of grievance that we're seeing, and our response to that is the politics of change and hope. And so we don't have time. We have to run at this. And the thing that gives me a lot of hope is that we've just got amazing, we've started the journey of devolution. We've got amazing leaders in our combined authorities. We've got amazing leaders on the ground that we need to work together at pace in order to start doing the things we want.
Brilliant. And of course, just in the run-up to conference, there was the Pride in Place 5 billion funding, £2 million a year over 10 years for 169 places, if I get that right. I mean, is that an economic intervention, or is that something else, or a bit of both? Like, how do you see that positioned in this?
So I'm an economist, so I see everything through the lens of the economy. No, so it is and more.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, it is people having a conversation in their community and their neighbourhoods about what is not working and what they want to change. And if we get it right, it's not just short-term interventions. It is about building legacy. And I'm giving the example of people say, look, you take over an asset, for example, you make it revenue generating in a way that allows you to invest in other community assets. You're building community wealth. And if we get it right, it is about changing place. It is about an economic intervention, but it does more than that. Yeah. It organises people in community. Because ultimately, my view on growth is growth happens in places, growth happens because individuals do certain things. And yes, we need the macro, but we absolutely need the micro as well. And if we get this right, it is the beginnings of how do you build the conurbation of not just community leaders, but businesses, anchors that come together and say, what are we going to change? How do we leverage in investment? So I would love the business, private sector to invest. I want philanthropy to invest. We've got, seed funding to be put in place. How do we expand it in order to start renew and regenerate our communities?
Could I just ask a question? Can communities borrow against it? That's something I'm not sure that's been talked about, but that could be a good opportunity. It's 20 million over 10 years. You could potentially borrow against it to deliver now bigger projects.
I think that's to be worked out in the design, isn't it? But it's a really good point. And if I may ask one further slightly cheeky question, one thing that was not in the Devo bill at all is anything to do with fiscal devolution. And given we're talking economics, there's been calls from quite a few mayoral combined authorities to bring forward a visitor levy as the first way to kind of bring forward locally raised taxation that then stays in place. I know you're very early on brief, so I'm putting you a bit on the spot here, but do you think that's something the government should be open to?
Well, listen, our mayors have said that this is a massive priority for them.
Yeah, this is what we want.
And in a world of devolution where we're talking about a right of request, Whitehall now needs to listen to the business case and respond to the business case.
Very good, very
This
good.
is why we have to so good.
I don't even need to mediate this conversation. It's just like a minister and mayor speaking to one another about what's needed. That's brilliant. Okay, thank you. Richard, now over to you. You've been sort of looking at this from all various levels. We've worked with you at kind of looking at the role of mayors and local leadership, but of course you also have the kind of overall macro brief. What do you think the government should be doing to deliver on, I'm going to say it again, grassroots growth?
Grassroots growth. I mean, it's no small feat, is it? So there's an awful lot in there. I mean, I got a name check in the speech as well, which is nice to hear. I'm from Warrington, so in the middle of Manchester and Liverpool, we can pretend which city you're from, whatever day of the week you like it to be. I'm exactly the same part of Warrington that Andy Burnham was from, so he can play that game too, as we've seen throughout his career.
Watch out, Andy Burnham, Richard Partington.
But I don't know, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, I get to go around the country for The Guardian speaking to different communities about, their lived experience of the economy, and I think it's quite clear that, as has been discussed already, there's a feeling that not all parts of the country have shared in the economic prosperity that the UK has managed to generate in recent years, and we've not generated enough in recent years as well. So there is a double challenge there to get grassroots growth and national growth at the same time. The two are completely interconnected from my perspective. If you're not utilising the full talents of communities outside of London and the South East across all four corners of the country, you're not going to be able to hit that challenge to grow the economy and to be one of the fastest growing economies in the G7, it isn't just about what happens in the City of London, it's about what happens in Manchester, in West Yorkshire, in the small towns outlying the big cities as well. And I think that's, there's an economic challenge there, but there is a political consequence of not getting that right. And the Prime Minister was fully focused on that in his speech today as well. And I think that is, it's going to be hugely important because you've had successive governments now, over the years when you've gone, when I've gone to speak to people and you say, well, we had this, we had Labour in for hundreds of years in this council or in this area and they didn't deliver, it's been useless. And they voted them out en masse in 2019 with the Red Wall election and Boris Johnson's landslide in those communities. And then you had the Tories for the past 5 years, since that point, 14 in total, completely undelivering on the prospect of shared economic growth and levelling up. I think people felt was a hollow promise. And if Labour doesn't manage to take up that mantle of change and ensure that they actually mean it, that economic growth outside of London and the South East is delivered, you're really playing into the hands of reform, where you have far right or far left political groups who will say, look, we've had successive promised agendas from governments of all political stripes that have not achieved anything like what we would like to see. So I guess that's my takeaway on this is like this. As a journalist, I'm probably more of the point where I can tell stories about the places I've been, the people I've spoken to, and what that lived experience is like. I might not have the right policy solutions to back that up, but I really welcome this as an area of focus that this panel is going to look at, and what this government has said, and the Prime Minister's speech just now has said to be a key priority.
Brilliant. I mean, I guess one thing I slightly fear when we go and speak to advisors and civil servants and people in the centre of government is when you say kind of what's the government's growth strategy, you kind of get 15 answers back. You're like, it's free ports, it's industrial strategy, it's devolution, it's and sometimes I'm kind of like, I'm looking to you as the journalist with the narrative, what, like, do you think when you're speaking to people across the country that say industrial strategy cuts through, and I'm kind of interested in how, if we think actually cost of living is how people feel how the economy is doing, like what have you seen of what the government's done so far that kind of cuts through to how people see their lives improving?
I think there is a real challenge. I know the previous government had a slogan, levelling up. Current government does not have a slogan of sorts to unify this sort of message. When I've visited places to write features about this type of a subject, industrial strategy is that something that kind of comes up on the doorstep? Not necessarily, no. Does the fact that a company has hired people in that community, in a new factory, in a new line of work, do people recognise that huge amounts of money are being spent in their local area and that jobs are being delivered as a consequence of it? I think 100% yes. I was in Teesside relatively recently talking about the prospects of offshore wind turbine manufacturing. People really do see the green jobs that are going to come through the investment that the government is sort of leveraging in, like the carbon capture and storage investment that's taking place in that community, as is over here in the northwest on Deeside and Wincott. And we've got a real challenge there again, as I say, like in that for Labour, this is something that is a strategic point of difference. If you can talk about the job opportunities that you're creating through this industrial strategy, you can talk about the green jobs of the future and offer people hope that there has been industrial decline in certain parts of the country where there has been not enough economic prosperity in recent years. If you can offer that positive message, you have got a powerful argument to make against reform who would rip up the net zero strategy and put at risk huge amounts of investment because the world is a changing place where it is a vital imperative that's seen by countries and businesses around the world to invest in these industries of the future. And if Labour can tell that story that they are investing in those communities, I think they should. If you can show that there are jobs being created, if you can show that the community feels the benefits of those jobs being created, then you can reap a political dividend from that.
Absolutely, and I guess one thing, just coming back on that, is about the time it takes for these jobs to be created. Like if we look at kind of Democrats and, you know, Biden's massive injections into the economy, but yet they kind of didn't reap political rewards. I totally agree with what you're saying. I'm just stress testing a bit, like, given Miatta's challenge of, you know, the rise of the right and reform and chomping at the bit, you know, is there time to wait for these jobs to appear? Do you think they're coming through already? Like, what's your feel, Miatta, on whether we have to wait to tell people to wait, or whether there are things that can happen sooner so people feel it?
So, look, in the end, it's what people feel. We can say anything we like as politicians. They will judge us on what they're sort of seeing in their communities. Jobs are being created. You know, my last week, for example, I was sort of looking at home upgrades, and actually those are jobs that we are training people for that are being created in our communities today, and we will continue doing that over the course of the next 5 years. But I actually think, and this is the reason why I think, if you like, the devolution and the regional agenda sits hand in glove with the community agenda, because I think you can do some really quick stuff in the community agenda that starts to build that sense of change, whilst the bigger structural change happens. And we've got to see both hand in glove. And you recognise, and if I think about the huge investment we're putting in green industries, which is absolutely right, some of that will materialise this Parliament, but a lot of it will materialise in the next Parliament. But people will give us the licence and they will stick with us if they can see change in their communities. And that will be about, you know, from the big to the small, that will be about the shop that's been boarded over for ages that's been turned into something, the community centre that's been converted, the high street that feels better. It will be about the sort of the everyday stuff as well as money in people's pockets, and we've got to do both in tandem.
Yeah, it was quite interesting for the Chancellor's speech yesterday. We kind of heard return to secure economics. We heard that sort of use of phrases, so it's very kind of heartening that actually that, as you say, that sort of everyday economics is kind of coming back. Marcus, coming to you next, I think, you know, we at IPPR North have greatly benefited from the government's kind of focus on regional growth and that #1 mission to grow the economy in every corner of the country. What's your advice to our ministers and our mayors on how they should go about it?
Thank you, Zoe, and good afternoon, everybody. I think the Prime Minister was right to kind of position the moment that we find ourselves in as being at a crossroads, and to recognise that for too long we've relied on a model that has over-centralised prosperity in one corner of the country, and to recognise that this is a policy choice and that there are alternative choices that we can choose to make. At IPPR North, we would really strongly advocate for a blueprint that was explicitly a regionally led model for growing the UK economy, building on not only the fortunes of that one corner of the country that has been backed for decades, but on the untapped potential of all regions, including, importantly for us, in the north of England. Our research has really consistently highlighted those deep regional divides that many of us in the room will feel day to day, and very much set the scene for that politics of grievance that I think is the phrase that everybody is thinking about over the course of this conference. It's very easy to feel aggrieved when you live in a declining economy, when you have seen your high street close up, when your children don't have economic opportunity. And it is absolutely right that the Labour Party is very clearly setting out its vision to respond to that. I think the three quick things that I want to add is absolutely that any kind of regional economic growth programme needs to have a very, very clear conceptualisation of place. It really needs to understand that different places play different roles in our economy, and it needs to build on the maturing devolution settlement that is allowing Tracy to act really strategically and to respond to those barriers that you spoke really eloquently about in terms of in the telecom industry. And that kind of responsive policy making is really key in growing local economies. And Miatta's work to extend that across the country so that we can have, you know, more Tracys in more places, unlocking those barriers, is absolutely right. But as Miatta said, there are policy levers that the state centrally can yank, and we have heard a lot of those over the course of this conference, and I do think that the government is moving in the right direction. The growth mission is explicitly about growing every region. The industrial strategy is very clear in how it links those key growth sectors that would build that security that Rachel Reeves has stressed, and talk about what that looks like in places, what it means for people, and things like the skills sector plans that will follow. The Pride in Places funding, I think, is a really exciting opportunity to think about what this looks like manifest in that grassroots growth that we're talking about. And we've heard really clearly from people like David Lammy, Steve Reed yesterday, Miata's own remarks, and the Prime Minister's vision, this need for a politics of place. And I think the idea of a Britain for all that is centred on renewing every town and city, I think is what he said, is absolutely the right one, but it does need to think about the different roles that each of those towns and cities play, how it backs those mayors and those strategic authorities in those places that will be set up in the next few years with a really active, muscular state that will marshal investment, that will provide policy coordination over things like housing, skills, transport, innovation, and importantly, and this is where the Pride in Places funding comes in, placemaking. Good places that people want to live in are a fundamental ingredient in economic growth. And that would be my answer to your question.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think what you picked up there as well from the Prime Minister's remarks about an active state and positively using public investment to rebalance the economy is super important. Right, I am going to throw the Q&A open to the audience. I will take questions in three so we can get through as many as possible. I will start at the front. Can I have 1, 2, 3 ladies, please?
Hello, I'm Sarah Hall. I'm the co-executive director at Positive Money, and I have a question with regards to the National Wealth Fund, which is intended to play a big role in delivering regional growth. Do you think that more could be done to ensure that it adequately serves regions across the UK, such as developing the National Wealth Fund into a network of regional development banks, for example?
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Beverly Nielsen, Councillor in Malvern Hills, Worcestershire. I was very interested to hear a little about the Pride in Place programme from Miata, and just wondered if you could give us a little more background on where that leaves parish councils and town councils and how they work together. Thank you.
My name's Ellie, I work for the CLA. We wanted to know, where does the rural fit in the growth agenda, especially with devolution, because we know the rural economy is lagging 14% behind in productivity. What can we do about this?
Brilliant. Thank you for those three first questions. So the first question about the role of the National Wealth Fund and regional development banks. Secondly, parish and town councils in the context of the Pride in Places funding, and how do rural economies fit into the devolution agenda? Miata, may I come to you first? So we've kind of got different scales here. National Wealth Fund, and then we've kind of got the more hyper-local. How do these fit together?
Yeah, so look, on both the National Wealth Fund and also the British Business Bank, I think there is a lot of work that we can do to both make sure that actually the capital that we have is being leveraged and leveraged well in order to invest, but also to think about the kind of local and regional composition of it. So increasingly, the British Business Bank, for example, are thinking about what does a kind of regional cluster portfolio look like. I definitely think that there's a scope for us to think about that in the context of the National Wealth Fund, and if we get it right, it should be an enabling tool and vehicle for our mayors. On the question of rural economies, I think there's two parts of it. So many of our big mayoral combined authorities will include rural communities within them. And the key point is that you're trying to look at it in the round when you think about the connections of different parts of a city region. And I give you, for example, the North East is a classic example. But we do also need a specific strategy for our rural economies. And there's a piece for me which is, so the beauty of my portfolio is I have regional devolution through to community devolution. And there's a really important piece for local authorities within that, which allows us to address the rural. And I think we need to do more in terms of local authority devolution, candidly. But the lesson that I have learned from sort of 15 years of working on regional and local policy is our mayors and our mayor combined authorities work well when you've got constituent authorities working hand in glove with the mayor. so that they can bring the specific needs of different parts of strategic authority into play, and we're making sure that we're responding and addressing that. And that matters particularly as we expand devolution candidly, and we're thinking about devolution for our 6 priority areas, which includes some really big rural areas where we've got challenges, and we've got to get that model right. But that is about making sure that we are also equipping local authorities to be leaders of delivery alongside the devolution that we're providing to our mayors. And then that sort of takes me beautifully to parish councils. We've got 2 things that are happening. So in the devolution bill, we are talking about neighbourhood governance. We've got Pride in Place also happening. And my view is that we need to bring all of this together, because we absolutely need institutions at the neighbourhood and local level that we can build on for the long term. And where we've already got capacity, you know, anyone that's done community organising, when you have leaders in the community being active and doing things, that is precious. So where we have some of that happening with our parish and town councils, we absolutely need to build on it. But the job for me, if we get this right, is that we are crowding in parts of our community that quite frankly are not around the table at the moment. And so if I think about, you know, community organising, often, you know the leaders that are sitting around the table, and we need to reach parts of the community that aren't, in order for this to be something that is generally representative of the place wherever that is. But we have to do that really quickly, so we would be mad not to build on some of the capabilities and capacity that we've got.
And may I just follow, I'm very conscious that one pushback on the Devo bill politically has been unitarisation and making local authorities more of the kind of 500,000 size, which I think especially rurally can feel very large when we're thinking about the geographies that 500,000 people-ish kind of cover. So I guess, you know, how do we bridge that gap between the town and parish council level, community level, and unitaries that are increasingly big?
Yeah, look, so 3 things. I like to remind people that the devolution bill actually doesn't do local government reorganisation. That's not the key principles that we're putting through, but there is obviously, at the same time as we're doing devolution, a big local government reorganisation piece happening. And my view is, the 2 things I'd say is the 500,000 is a kind of benchmark. And that we came to that benchmark because it was trying to think about what is the scale that it makes sense to aggregate services at. Because in the end, this works well because we are thinking about how we deliver services, sometimes quite fragmented from the perspective of residents in the community, and deliver that scale in order to deliver quality services. It is just a benchmark, and ultimately the proposals that are coming from different areas will be cognizant of what feels like the community and what feels like the natural boundaries, and we have to be respectful of that. So there is a process going on. But I come back to this neighbourhood governance, because I think if we get that right, that is really powerful. So that you can have regional, you can have local authorities level that makes sense in terms of the services that we need to be delivering and providing for our residents. And then you've got that level below, that neighbourhood level, that is generally representative, where I think you can start doing some really exciting things. And one of the frustrations for me is that it's very, very fragmented, and we've got a patchwork. So you will have in some areas town and parish councils, some might have community forums, but it's a complete hodgepodge. There's a little bit of a lottery. And that's fine, because you need to have diversity and differentiation that works for communities, but we need to make sure that every community feels representative, and that they've got structures, because ultimately success for me is that we're leveraging more money out of Whitehall and putting it out into the communities, but that requires us to have the structures and the infrastructure of the people in order to be able to do that.
Brilliant, thank you. How does this look like from
Yeah.
your perspective, Tracy?
Well, talking about the Wealth Fund, Rachel Reeves, I think it was last year, allocated a special relationship with West Yorkshire and the Wealth Fund and a number of other mayoral strategic authorities. Has that given us incredible outcomes? I wouldn't say so far. They're helping us with mass transit, which is really helpful, and doing a lot of work on understanding their sort of funding structure. But I would also say that part of our issue is there is money available. There's pension funds, there's the Wealth Fund, there's the British Business Bank, there's Aviva's, there's all people, there's private cash out there. It is part of our challenge as mayors to ensure that all businesses are ready to take it or to take those opportunities. And too often, a business might think they're ready for investment and they're just not. So we've been able to, with money that we have for our businesses, to support them to be ready for investment. And particularly when it comes to women entrepreneurs, we have a focus on that inequity for women to access finance. Regarding the, also just to say, another point on the Wealth Fund. The British Business Bank has been defined as a bank that is going to help the creative industries. Now, all of the mayors in the north have come together. I'm curating this relationship called One Creative North. We're all coming together with BBC, Channel 4, ITV, with Arts Council England, all the universities and colleges, to offer a creative package that collectively we're going to be greater than the sum of our parts. 4 strands: music, film and TV, gaming, and the spoken and written word. Now, we've been saying to DCMS, how can we turbocharge these strands with our businesses? And the British Business Bank was seen as the solution. But actually they don't have the fund managers who understand the creative industries. So that has been, what has been brilliant is that One Creative North has exposed a bit of a weak spot in the British Business Bank, in that what they understand as creative industries is just digital. So this has been really good. So I think it's about us making businesses ready for investment and to talk the language of big money and big banks, but also the banks themselves to understand the opportunities for investment that might not be where they normally sit. That brings me on to rural. I think the way that mayors have been collaborating, and in Yorkshire we have the White Rose partnership, so it's myself, the Mayor of South Yorkshire, Oliver Coppard, the Mayor of York and North Yorkshire, David Scaife, coming together under that banner of the White Rose, working collectively together to talk about Yorkshire more widely. And David and I have spoken quite extensively about the fact we manufacture food, he grows food. And the White Rose Partnership can come together. We're all going on a trade mission to India in the autumn, or the Northern Mayors. We can talk very lucidly about the opportunity for the rural parts of York and North Yorkshire and the manufacturing speciality of West Yorkshire. So I do think that rural communities do feel occasionally anxious about feeling left out, and we will have that again turbocharged when we've got like Sussex coming into mayoralties, non-metropolitan mayoralties that will have different challenges again. But I do think that the mayors, when you've got devolution, you've got somebody to challenge, because previously it would be all local authority leaders, they'd have their own agendas, but now with that sort of fulcrum of leadership, you could say to the Mayor of York and North Yorkshire, what are you doing about rural? And I think that does give us a greater accountability. And just to underscore what Miata said, that too often the many-layered versions of local leadership are often based on individually dynamic, like yourself, dynamic people who want to see change and better communities. And it shouldn't be a lottery. It should be that everybody, everywhere, gets that same opportunity to get money for their places.
Brilliant, thank you. 3 more, I'll come from the back this time. The lady in the pink scarf, the gentleman here, and then the gentleman here in the turquoise. Sorry, I started at the back, went the way front. If you could say who you are and if you're representing any organisation, I think that'd be great.
Thank you. I'm Sam Rex-Edwards from the Finance Innovation Lab and the Fair Banking for All campaign. So we've talked a lot about obviously grassroots growth, cost of living, community being front and centre. How does the panel see the role of grassroots community financial services like credit unions and community development finance institutions that really provide accessible, affordable credit for individuals, SMEs, and social enterprises, co-ops, their role in inclusive growth? And should the National Financial Inclusion Strategy be setting ambitious commitments to make sure these critical financial services can grow and scale and have even more impact in their communities?
Sounds like you think they should do.
I know, wait, for it to happen.
Lonsdale. We're about to hear the mayor. Oliver Coppard, in a different meeting, suggested that it would be an idea for mayors also to be made members of the House of Lords, so they could form a committee to oversee Northern Powerhouse Rail and similar projects. I don't know anything about that specific proposal, but more generally, what do you think needs to be the structural arrangement for regions to be represented at the centre? Does there need to be something more than the Council of Nations and Regions? What does the Council of Nations and Regions need to be doing? How can we institutionalise the role of the regions at the centre and not just have powers coming down and responsibilities completely separate?
Brilliant, thank you.
Hello, it's One Centre for Cities. My question's on the capacity of the current mayoral authorities. Obviously, it's very positive we have a devolution bill and we have a lot of devolved funding for the industrial strategy. What we've seen sometimes, for example, in the US example, that there was a lot of delay due to the states, a lot of individual states, like lack of capacity. And those have been around for a lot longer than our devolution process. Well, now, obviously, it's a very positive process, but is there any sort of, in your view, how can the mayors help each other, or how can the UK government help the mayors to sort of build up capacity so they can fully execute the new power and funding they have?
Yeah, before I forget, Tracy, I don't have a pen. Centre for Cities, how do we increase capacity? What we've been doing is we've been seconding government departments into our organisation. So we started with DWP because we knew we had an issue trying to get people into work. DFT, we're bringing people in because we want, on our mass transit, they have to be close to us. But I think you raise a really important point, that there's only going to be a certain cohort of people who have experience in mayoral combined authorities, and they will be able to, pick and choose to some degree because the need is great. We are growing rapidly as an organisation. We're currently 1,000 people. We're probably going to get to 1,500, and we're definitely going to need that capacity. And so that does answer the point of, to some degree, of where do we fit as well at the centre. And there is the Council of Regions and Nations and the Council of Mayors. And the Council of Mayors is going to be the forum which we can discuss the right to request. So I do feel in the Council of Mayors that's going to be more of a working group to get change. I love Oliver, and swanning about in the House of Lords sounds lovely. But I thought we were going to abolish the House of Lords. I thought that was in Gordon's initial work that was he presented in Leeds. But it is a bit galling that when I go to London, I was in front of a select committee on devolution, and Ben Housham was there, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm in Parliament twice a week because he's in the Lords, so he has a pass and he has work to do. So he's in the corridors of power, so to speak, if that's what you were talking about. However, I would also question, is he getting his job done where he's supposed to be? Because I go into work 5 days a week, and this is a lifestyle job. I work 7 days a week and 14-hour days. So the idea that I'd also be seeing legislation through in great detail could be quite a distraction. My ask of government is to let mayors be more involved as the devolution and community renewal bill goes through, community empowerment bill goes through, because we're actually doing the job and we could be helpful. And finally, yes, credit unions are amazing. We've got a brilliant one in Bradford. I'm trying to bring all the credit unions together to have a West Yorkshire credit union model. So very happy if you've got some suggestions on local examples.
Brilliant. Marcus, may I come to you, because this idea that the gentleman references that, of course, Gordon Brown put in his commission, talking about an assembly of nations and regions. Where do you sit on that should be a replacement for the House of Lords? I'm asking you to make IPPR North policy on the hoof, so I'm empowering you to take the charge here.
Well, there we go. Look, a elected second chamber is long-standing our policy, and we've previously articulated the need for nations and regions to be at the heart of that. When you look internationally, there are models where actors in local and regional governments are directly represented in national parliaments. That's the case in Spain, it's the case in Germany. It wouldn't necessarily have to be the mayor. I think Tracy's point around where you spend your time is critical. You know, mayors have a really significant suite of powers and a really significant budget to be investing in their communities, and that ought to be their full-time job, and that's why I think it's right that in the bill that Miatta's bringing forward, mayors can only be mayors and can no longer be members of the House of Commons. Nonetheless, there are models where you could appoint someone, a representative of each individual combined authority, and that's not kind of unheard of internationally. So absolutely would like to see kind of local and regional government represented in the centre, not least because given the state of our constitution, God forbid, it's quite easy to abolish things, unfortunately, and we know that from what Margaret Thatcher did to the metropolitan county councils historically. And I think there needs to be a kind of protection for devolution inherent in our constitution. I think actually having representation of the local state in the central state is one way you provide that constitutional counterbalance. Just really quickly, briefly want to say, on credit unions, I think that they are really important in terms of responding to the dislocation and lack of agency in communities. I think they breed solidarity, and that's a really missing thing in terms of the politics of grievance that we're all talking about, is how you build institutions that bring people together around common purpose. And they can also be sites of financial innovation. I think what's happening in Greater Manchester with the being able to use the credit union to buy your annual pass is a really fantastic innovation that both enables people to access economic opportunity and breeds a feeling of solidarity. And just really quickly on capacity, one thing I would point to is that during the austerity era local government capacity was totally decimated, but almost one-for-one, central state capacity rose. And so I think there is a need to build on the things that Tracy's describing to actually shift capacity back out of the centre into local governments so they can be more muscular and intervene in their local governments too.
Brilliant. Well, it's kind of answered all the questions at once, but Miatta, was there anything you wanted to pick up there, either on elected second chamber capacity building or credit unions? You can choose now because we don't have any gaps in answers.
Yeah, well, let me pick up the sort of institution piece and how we get longevity, and I'll pick up on the capacity piece. So look, I think the Council of Nations and Regions and the Council of Mayors are pretty nascent institutions, but if we get this right, it will stick. And you know, it's easy for different governments of the day to kind of come and abolish something, but if it really works and it's effective, it's really, really hard to do that. And I think the opportunity for us is to try and use these as things that aren't just talking shops, aren't just things that actually have no purchase and traction, so it's easy to dispel with. And the opportunity for me, and the way that I'm seeing them, is the ability for mayors to come together, to be very, very clear about their asks, but critically to be able to eyeball secretaries of state and to cut. Sometimes you just need to cut through the machine and the bureaucracy, and those spaces allows that sort of conversation to happen. And the thing that I think our team at MHCLG needs to do is to make sure that we are creating the space for it to be that effective. And if it lands and it has traction, it will endure and it will build from that, no matter what we have sort of locked in legislation. Just on the sort of capacity point, which I think is really, really key, and it's something that I'm sort of very exercised about. And I think there are sort of three levels. There's definitely peer-to-peer support. So we want to expand devolution across the country. We want to create more strategic authorities. We have the opportunity that we've got established rail authorities for the new ones to learn from, and we need to make sure we have that sort of peer learning right. There's a piece around funding, and we've got to fund capacity. And we're thinking about what that looks like and how we can build on what we have. But I absolutely agree about how do we shift all that capacity that sits in the centre in very big Whitehall departments into our regions. There is a process of trying to make Whitehall more streamlined, and the question I've asked the department is, well, how are we linking that directly into a programme of building capacity into our priorities that we're creating? So I think there is definitely space for us.
And I just ask on the council, obviously that's it's a great aspiration to have that's a very kind of active and decision-making body. I suppose with the greater political variation, let's say, of our mayors, even in the north now we have Ben Houchin from Conservatives and Luke Campbell from Reform. Do you think that sort of, mutual agreement is possible in a forum like that, given that you're no longer talking to just Labour mayors?
I mean, absolutely. And look, for me, our mayoralties have been a real success in pluralistic politics. Our mayors had to work with the Tory government for a long time, however hard it was, but they had the mandate of their communities, and they were able to kind of push and prosecute the things that they wanted. So that is absolutely right. And in the end, the difference, I remember when we stripped away all the kind of regional institutions that the last Labour government had made. I think that was a big mistake, but it could be done so quickly with no opposition or no traction, because the democratic mandate below it wasn't there. And I think the thing that we got right this time is mayors that have their own mandate. And actually, if people can see that their mayors are standing up for their community and driving change, it becomes very, very hard for successive governments to decide to bring this back. And that's the thing that I think we got right this time that we hadn't got right.
Brilliant.
On that note, Zoe, I'm sorry I have to go.
You
Apologies,
go.
I've got the nod from the back.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Tracy. Thanks so much
It's a really
for
great
joining us.
to
Join us. And Richard, just on that front, when you go and speak to communities, then I'll come for a last round of questions. Do you think this sort of traction that mayors are getting, do you have a sense that this is going to be an entrenched part of our system going forward?
I think so. I mean, there's been a huge amount of success that the mayors have managed to deliver so far. I think since we've seen, particularly Andy and Tracy in the Manchester and West Yorkshire, Steve Rotham here in Merseyside, we've had a great degree of success that the mayors have managed to deliver. I am interested to see what happens as we see more political diversity in the mayors, as has been touched on. We now have 2 Reform mayors. There could be more again come the next rounds of devolution that we have. You're creating mayoral authorities that look very different as well, in that you have a mayor of Surrey or Essex or Staffordshire, as opposed to Greater Manchester, big urban conurbations. There's going to be competing interests in each of these places. But I kind of feel that there is now an embedded culture of mayors in the UK, and I think that can only be to the positive, and that it's something that I would hope that a future government would not want to unpick as a consequence.
And may I just come back on that in terms of thinking about economic growth again? Like, do you think the mayors are showing that they are doing economics, or talking about the economy differently? Like, is there that variation that you see at the national level in terms of different parties offer, or is it really place before politics and it all sorts of merges into one? Like, how
place before politics,
yeah.
most definitely. So I recently saw Ben Houchin, and he is a classic example of that, in that he's the only Tory mayor at this moment in time, but he felt as though he had the agency in his region, and that he had, despite there being a Labour government in power, he was getting what he needed to deliver in his local area, and that's to the positive. And one of the big things that I think has been important and consequential of the mayors is that they act as a window shop for their local area when speaking to business, to international investors, and to sort of coordinate for their local areas. And read recently about Greater Manchester, and it's got a faster growth in productivity than any other part of the country at this moment in time. And what are the key ingredients for that? One of them is sustained political leadership and coordination in that area between not just the mayoral authority, but local councils, local businesses, and other anchor institutions in the universities and the third sector. And if you have that coordination and the mayors acting as the figurehead on top of it, you can put place before everything else and deliver for the local economy.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'll take one final round of questions. If anybody was able to turn down the heat in here, I don't know if it's just me, I don't know whether growth is just, pouring out of all of our pores, but it seems to be getting very hot. I will take 3 last questions. A gentleman here, the gentleman in the back corner, and the lady here in red. Thank you.
Thanks very much, James Pittman from Study Group. I'd be interested in the panel's view on the importance of international students driving economic growth and jobs in the regions. They're obviously associated with any city that has a university, and the hinterland as well. It's worth 42 billion economics, for about 400,000 jobs. Importantly, 200,000 of those jobs almost certainly in local communities and in supply chains. In the context of that, and they also bring about 15 billion in investment every single year. In the context of that, what does the panel feel about the tariff that has just been announced on our 5th largest export sector, being international education, announced yesterday, when probably a smarter route might have been to grow the number of international students, and that would have driven the tax income to support domestic maintenance grants, which we all agree are very, very much needed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. What a great panel. I'm going to have to say that. It's actually been really interesting. I'm Connell. I'm from Trafford Council in Greater Manchester, and we've worked with government a lot on exceptional financial support arrangements, and the Fair Funding Review has been brilliant in getting cash into the most deprived areas and has been a real reset with government. However, still a quarter of councils in Britain are going to consider exceptional financial support. How can local authorities deliver growth if they can barely survive as it is?
Thank you. And for raising the issue.
Thank you. Gina Cicerone from the Fair Education Alliance, and we do a lot of work neighbourhood to national with combined authorities. My question is, I love that this is a vehicle for democratic participation, and I totally understand that we need to deliver. But the big concern is that we do not have democratic participation when it comes to local and regional elections. And I'm really curious, I think from a news perspective and a media perspective, but also from a Whitehall perspective and a policy perspective, how do we actually raise the awareness and the profile to shift the mental models so that there's not only the skills and the knowledge, but also just a passion and a care for taking care of our really valued democracy?
Yeah, really great set of questions, thank you. So we've got the role of international students, and Tara Switchard, I think I'm going to come to you on that one. Reflections on the Fair Funding Review and local government finance, and thirdly the sort of democratic project that's being asked now of devolution, which I think is a really important shift actually of what we're seeing. So Richard, may I come to you first on
Yes, very quickly. I mean, the chap from the Centre for Cities has just left, but I will shout out the rival think tank.
He's not even here, there's no need.
They recently had a report about the effect of the migration restrictions on university towns, and there is a correlation between the largest exporting sectors and some underperforming communities economically, where universities play an outsized role in those places. And I think that this is, there is a national policy context that has an effect on the local as well. And that is something that we shouldn't forget, very much so. And universities, I think, do play a critical role, particularly in communities where there isn't always a strong private sector. And so that is something that I think the government very much must need to consider. I'll pick up on the democratic sort of deficit as well. I don't know what the solution to this is, but I'm hugely sort of saddened by the steady demise of local media, the absolute decimation of our media organisations in towns and cities across the country. Like was the grassroots of democracy, and holding local elected politicians to account was a key task of that media, and now it just isn't really there in the way and shape that it used to be. I don't know what the solution to that is. Part of it is people not necessarily buying and consuming media in the same way that they once used to. I don't know how you turn that around, but I do think that it is sad and it is problematic when you are devolving power, yet there isn't the same degree of checks and balances that you would wish to have for such a system from the fourth estate.
Marcus, I'm going to briefly turn to you before giving me the last word. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so very quickly then, Connor, on the Fair Funding Review, local authorities in financial difficulty are not going to be able to contribute to economic growth, not least as employers, but actively to being in their economy. I do think one of the significant things the government has done to better back local authorities is multi-year financial assessments, and that kind of predictability will be absolutely critical in ensuring sustainability in local government. And then just really quickly on Gina's point, one thing that I think is underappreciated is that the work that the government is doing to kind of standardise local government structures is really important in making sure that people understand who does what, because the vast majority of people in this country have no idea what a councillor does, whether they're a district or a county or parish, or what a mayor does and what their MP does. And so it's not, the kind of surprising that turnout for things that aren't general elections are kind of depressed when they're not actually quite sure what they're expressing agency about.
Great point. And Miata, final word
Look,
for you.
just two things on the funding piece. We are very, very conscious that we've had a decade and a half of underinvestment in local authorities. It's very hard to turn that around in 1 year, which is what I'd love, and every single Labour MP and Minister would love, but it is hard. We have put in more investment in local authorities. I think that is a trajectory of this government will continue doing that. But we've also done things which, as you say, I think are a game changer, multi-year settlements. The idea that we used to have annual budgets just seems had always seemed mad to me and remains mad. But also, critically, we're trying to get rid of the fragmentation. So the silos, the tiny bits that you've got to deliver, that just doesn't make sense when you're trying to deliver services with stretched resources. So I hope that we build on that going forward. And the Fair Funding Review is trying to do the job of, the last government rewired the funding model so that we weren't getting money into our deprived areas, and we're trying to rebalance that. And it is difficult, and there is a kind of rebalancing across the country. I say this is a London MP, so there are challenges there, but we will get it right, and we're taking a lot of feedback from people in order to get to a model that means that we're getting resources into communities that absolutely need it, which is the priority. And the final thing I'd say just on the democratic piece is, in the end, when we created the first City Region Mayor in Manchester, I was part of that deal and I was working with the Combined Authority at the time. And look, the idea behind it was, if you can have these democratic institutions that people viscerally feel impacts on their place. I think the Manchester story is a powerful story. When we created that Mayoral Combined Authority, that was not, the story of productivity we're seeing is not where we were there. And it has demonstrated proof of concept, and I hope the democratic deficit reduces when people say, that person is my person, I elected them, and they haven't delivered in this place, or they have delivered in that place. So we're still pretty early on in the journey of this, but I think if we can build that power at a level below the national, that's actually how we get people to not just have more faith, but also more connection in politics, and that starts to kind of build up the democratic surplus that we have to.
Well, on that very positive note, I'd like to thank our brilliant panel, fantastic. May we all be part of the grassroots growth story, so happy rest of conference.